The sun cast long shadows across the peaceful countryside near Busan, painting the rocky hills in warm hues of orange and gold. For 12-year-old Hanmei Park, this was her favorite time of day. While other children her age rushed home to their video games and social media, she adjusted the straps of her worn backpack, filled with her precious collection of self-made tools. Hanmei had always been different from her classmates. When they talked about the latest phone models or trending videos, she would quietly sketch designs for improving her homemade metal detector. The device wasn't pretty, just copper wire wrapped around a plastic pipe, connected to an old radio she had modified. But it was hers, built with parts salvaged from her grandmother's storage shed. "Be back before dark," her grandmother Sun He's words echoed in her mind as she climbed higher up the familiar path. The old woman never stopped her from exploring, understanding that some children were born with adventure in their hearts. Hanmei's parents, busy with their jobs in Seoul, had left her in Sun He's care for the summer, something that had become a cherished tradition over the years. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers as Hanmei swept her detector back and forth across the ground. She had already mapped most of the hillside in her notebook, marking spots where she'd found old coins, rusty farm tools, and even a few wartime relics. But today, something felt different. The detector's usual steady hum suddenly changed to a high-pitched whine. Hanmei froze, her heart beating faster. In 3 years of treasure hunting, she'd never heard it make that sound before. She moved the detector slowly, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound grew stronger near a patch of thick vegetation. Dropping to her knees, Hanmei pulled out her trowel and began carefully clearing away the plants. Her fingers trembled with excitement as they brushed against something smooth and cold. It wasn't rough like a rock or rusty like old metal. This felt almost glassy to the touch. As she cleared more soil away, she gasped. A fragment of something metallic lay partially exposed, but it wasn't like any metal she'd ever seen. The surface seemed to ripple with a faint blue light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Hanmei sat back on her heels, blinking hard to make sure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. The light grew stronger as darkness began to fall. Following the trail of similar fragments, Hanmei pushed through dense undergrowth until she reached a sheer rock face. There, hidden behind years of vines and moss, was something that made her jaw drop. A perfect geometric opening, its edges too straight to be natural. Hanmei spent the next hour taking pictures with her old phone and making detailed sketches in her notebook. She collected a few of the smaller fragments, carefully wrapping them in her handkerchief. The rational part of her brain suggested this might be part of an old military installation. There were plenty of those scattered across Korea. But something about the pulsing light and the strange metal told her this was different. The next morning, Hanmei took her findings to the local authorities. The police officer at the desk barely glanced at her pictures before sliding them back across the counter. "Probably just an old bunker," he said with a patronizing smile. "Best to stay away from such places, young lady. They can be dangerous." At the local museum, the curator was more polite but equally dismissive. "Many unusual rock formations in that area," she explained, barely looking up from her computer. "The light you saw was likely mineral deposits reflecting the sunset." Even her grandmother, who always supported her adventures, seemed uncertain. Soon he studied the fragments on their kitchen table, her weathered hands turning them over carefully. "During the war," she said slowly, "many things were built in these hills. Military bunkers, storage facilities. Perhaps that's what you found." But Hanmei knew better. She had seen enough military bunkers to know their crude concrete construction. This was something else entirely. That night, she sat at her desk, updating her discovery journal. The fragments she'd collected still pulsed with that mysterious blue light, casting soft shadows on her walls. Tomorrow, she decided, she would go back. She would take better pictures, make more detailed measurements, and gather more evidence. Someone had to believe her eventually. As she drifted off to sleep, Hanmei didn't know that her discovery would soon change not just her life, but the understanding of human history itself. In her dreams that night, she heard strange music, like nothing she'd ever heard before, calling to her from deep within the hillside. The blue light danced behind her eyelids, and somewhere in the darkness, something ancient was beginning to wake up. Every morning for the next 2 weeks, Han-Mei woke up before sunrise. She packed her backpack with measuring tape, graph paper, sample bags, and her old tablet with a cracked screen, a hand-me-down from her older brother. The strange blue fragments still pulsed softly in her desk drawer, wrapped carefully in cloth. Her grandmother watched with growing concern as Han-Mei spent hours documenting everything about the site. The young girl had created detailed maps, marking the pattern of how the glowing fragments were scattered across the hillside. She recorded the strength of the blue light at different times of day and carefully noted any changes in the geometric opening. "You need to eat properly," soon he would say, leaving plates of food outside Han-Mei's room as she worked late into the night, organizing her findings. But Han-Mei barely noticed the meals. She was too busy writing emails to universities, museums, and research centers across Korea. Most never replied. Those who did sent polite rejections or form letters. Then came the day that changed everything. Han-Mei was checking her email between classes when she saw a message from Dr. Ji-Ho Kim. Unlike other researchers, he had questions, detailed, specific questions about her discoveries. He asked about the exact color of the light pulses, the temperature of the fragments, and whether she had noticed any patterns in their arrangement. Dr. Kim was known in scientific circles for investigating unexplained phenomena. Some called him brilliant, others called him crazy. But when he arrived at Soon-hee's house 3 days later, he didn't look crazy at all. He was a tall, serious man who spoke directly to Han-Mei as an equal, not as a child with an overactive imagination. "Show me everything," he said simply, adjusting his round glasses. Han-Mei led him to her room, where she had created a detailed wall display of her findings. Dr. Kim studied her careful measurements and photographs in silence, occasionally nodding to himself. When Han-Mei showed him the fragments, his professional composure cracked slightly. He pulled out a strange device from his bag, something that looked like a cross between a phone and a medical scanner. As he held it over the fragments, it emitted a series of rapid beats. "This is impossible," he whispered, more to himself than to Han-Mei. He ran the scan 3 more times, each time with the same result. "These fragments, they're emitting energy signatures I've never seen before. The elements in this metal, they don't exist on our periodic table." The next morning, a team of researchers arrived with trucks full of equipment. Han-Mei watched as they set up strange-looking machines around the hillside. Soon he served them tea, watching from her porch as they worked. Dr. Kim let Han-Mei assist with the investigation, teaching her how to use their equipment. Sometimes, he told her, the best discoveries come from those who aren't bound by conventional thinking. She learned that the blue pulses were actually waves of unknown energy, rippling through what appeared to be a field of distorted time around the opening. As they prepared to enter the geometric opening, Dr. Kim insisted that Han-Mei join the first exploration team. "You found it," he said firmly when others protested about bringing a child. "It seems to respond to your presence." He was right. As Han-Mei stepped into the opening, lights began to activate along the walls. Not harsh electric lights, but a soft, organic glow that spread like ripples in a pond. The walls themselves seemed to be alive, shifting with patterns that made her eyes blur if she looked at them too long. The corridor led deeper into the hillside, but it wasn't rough like a cave or angular like a bunker. The passages curved gracefully, defying the normal rules of architecture. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being caught and released in waves. One of the researchers pointed out that their compasses had stopped working. Another noticed that time itself seemed to move differently inside. Their watches showed different times, some running faster, others slower. Then they entered a vast chamber that made everyone stop breathing for a moment. The ceiling soared impossibly high, disappearing into darkness above. But it was what sat in the center of the chamber that changed everything. A massive structure that could only be described as a spacecraft. It rested on elegant supports that curved up from the floor like tree branches. The hull was made of the same strange metal as the fragments, but intact and unmarred by time. A soft field of energy shimmed around it, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. A temporal stasis field, Dr. Kim breathed, his scientific instruments going haywire. It's been perfectly preserved, for who knows how long. He turned to Han-Mei, who stood silently staring at the ship. Do you understand what you found? This changes everything we thought we knew about Earth's history. Han-Mei nodded slowly, her heart pounding. The ship seemed to pulse in time with the fragments in her pocket. She could feel it calling to her, just like in her dreams. As she watched, new lights began to activate across its surface, as if the ancient vessel was slowly waking up after a very long sleep. Behind her, she could hear the excited voices of the researchers as they set up their equipment. But Han-Mei stood still, knowing somehow that this was just the beginning. The real discovery was yet to come, and somehow she knew she would be at the center of it all. Days turned into weeks as researchers swarmed the hillside site. They brought machines, computers, and equipment of all kinds, turning Soon-He's peaceful countryside home into a bustling research station. Han-Mei watched as they argued endlessly about safety protocols, research priorities, and who had the authority to do what. But while the adults were busy with their meetings and procedures, she noticed something they all missed. It happened one afternoon when she was sitting alone near the ship, humming an old lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The ship's surface began to ripple with colors, like sunlight on water, matching the rhythm of her song. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but each time she hummed, the colors danced. When she stopped, they faded. She spent hours testing different tunes, watching how the ship responded to each one. Sometimes, the colors were bright and energetic, other times soft and flowing. Han-Mei knew she had to investigate further. Late one evening, after most of the researchers had left, she asked her grandmother's permission to visit the ship again. Soon, he looked at her thoughtfully before nodding. Take your gaejum, she suggested, gesturing to the traditional Korean string instrument that sat in a corner. If the ship likes music, perhaps it will like that too. The gaejum had been in their family for generations. Han-Mei had learned to play it from her grandmother, who had learned from her grandmother before her. Its 12 strings could produce sounds ranging from gentle whispers to bold, clear notes that seemed to pierce the air. Setting up the instrument near the ship, Han-Mei began to play. The first notes barely faded away when the entire chamber came alive with light. Colors rippled across the walls in patterns she had never seen before. The ship's surface began to pulse, not just with color, but with shapes that looked almost like writing. As her fingers danced across the strings, playing an ancient melody, the shapes began to organize themselves. They formed patterns that reminded her of the mathematics problems she loved at school. Geometric sequences, wave formations, and numerical progressions that seemed to float in the air. Han-Mei's heart raced as understanding dawned. The ship wasn't trying to communicate with words. It was using music and mathematics, languages that didn't need translation. She began to play different mathematical sequences through her music, like the Fibonacci sequence she had learned about in school. The ship responded immediately. The patterns in the air shifted, completing the sequences she started and offering new ones. It was like a conversation, but instead of words, they were exchanging mathematical ideas through music. During one particularly complex melody, something extraordinary happened. The center of the chamber filled with light, and suddenly Han-Mei found herself surrounded by holographic images. They showed beings unlike anything she had ever seen or imagined. They were tall and graceful, with bodies that seemed to flow like liquid crystal. These were the Ryun. The holograms showed their civilization, cities that looked like they were grown rather than built, ships that sailed through space like schools of fish through water, and most importantly, their music. The Ryun didn't just use music for communication. It was the foundation of their entire civilization. Their technology, their architecture, even their writing system was based on musical mathematics. Han Mai sat transfixed as the history of an alien civilization played out before her. She saw how they had discovered Earth thousands of years ago, how they had watched humanity's early development with interest and hope. The Rian had seen something special in humans, a capacity for both logic and creativity that reminded them of themselves. When Dr. Kim arrived the next morning, he found Han Mai asleep next to her Gaijum, the ship still humming softly with residual energy from their musical conversation. As she explained what she had discovered, his eyes grew wider and wider. "Of course," he whispered. "We've been trying to decode their language as if it were words or symbols. But music and mathematics, they're truly universal. A civilization advanced enough to travel between stars would understand that." But even as the excitement of her discovery spread through the research team, Han Mei kept some things to herself. She didn't tell them about the deeper melodies the ship had shared with her, or about the strange dreams she now had every night. Dreams filled with songs she had never heard before, yet somehow knew by heart. The Rian had chosen to communicate with a 12-year-old girl who still saw the world with wonder, who understood that sometimes the most profound truths couldn't be spoken, only felt through the universal languages of music and mathematics, and Han Mei knew this was just the beginning of their story. A soft melody floated through the chamber as Han Mei practiced her daily musical conversation with the ship. Over the past month, she had developed a routine. Each morning, she would arrive with her Gaijum and play, learning more about the ancient vessel's secrets. But today was different. As her fingers plucked the final notes of a traditional Korean folk song, the ship's response changed. Instead of the usual patterns of light and mathematical sequences, a new kind of hologram appeared. It surrounded Han Mai in a sphere of shifting light, scanning her from head to toe. The light was warm and gentle, like sunshine on a spring morning. When it faded, the ship's entire interior pulsed with a deep blue glow. Guardian Protocol activated, appeared in glowing symbols that somehow transformed into words she could understand. Primary Guardian, Han Mei Park. Age, 12 Earth years. Status, accepted. Dr. Kim, who had been quietly observing from the corner, dropped his tablet in surprise. The device clattered to the floor, but neither he nor Han Mei moved to pick it up. They watched as the ship's systems, dormant for 50,000 years, began awakening one by one. "The ship, it chose you," Dr. Kim said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "In all my years of research, I've never seen anything like this." He approached carefully, his instruments recording everything. "It seems your music didn't just communicate with the ship, it proved you were worthy of its trust." Han Mei felt a strange warmth spread through her body. The ship was sharing information with her now, not through words or even music, but through a kind of understanding that flowed directly into her mind. She saw images of the Rian, not just as observers of Earth, but as its secret guardians. Under Dr. Kim's guidance, and with her grandmother Soon-hee watching protectively, Han Mei learned to interpret these visions. The Rian had been far more than just visitors to Earth. They had been researchers, scientists, and caretakers, studying human civilization from its earliest days. "Look at this," Han Mei said one afternoon, as new holograms filled the chamber. They showed ancient human settlements, but with something extra, carefully placed Rian artifacts glowing with subtle energy. They didn't just watch us. They helped us learn. The images showed how these artifacts had influenced human development. A piece of Rian technology, appearing to primitive humans as a strangely marked stone, had inspired the first mathematical systems. A fragment of their musical instruments had led to the development of early human music. They were like teachers, Soon-hee observed, watching the holograms with keen interest. But they never showed themselves or gave direct answers. They let humans learn and discover on their own. Dr. Kim spent hours documenting everything, his excitement growing with each new revelation. This explains so many archaeological mysteries. he said, furiously taking notes. The sudden leaps in human understanding, the similar patterns in civilizations that never contacted each other, it was all guided by the Rian. But being the ship's guardian wasn't just about learning its history. Hanmei discovered that she could now access its systems, though only through specific musical sequences. Each morning, she would check the ship's status, making sure its temporal stasis field remained stable and its archives were properly preserved. The ship taught her things too. Through their musical conversations, Hanmei learned about sciences far beyond current human understanding. She saw how the Rian had mastered the relationship between music, mathematics, and the very fabric of space-time. It's like they knew, Hanmei said one evening, sitting with her grandmother on their porch, looking at the stars. They knew that someday someone would find their ship, someone who could understand their music. Soon he smiled, patting her granddaughter's hand. Perhaps they saw something in humans that reminded them of themselves, the ability to create, to imagine, to make music that touches the soul. As days passed, Hanmei grew more comfortable in her role as guardian. She started teaching others how to communicate with the ship through music, though none could connect with it as deeply as she could. Dr. Kim's team made breakthrough after breakthrough, understanding more about human history and the Rian's subtle influence. But sometimes, late at night, Hanmei would sit alone in the ship's chamber, playing her gaejum and thinking about the responsibility she now carried. The Rian had trusted humanity enough to leave their legacy here, hidden but not forgotten, waiting for the right moment and the right person to be discovered. The ship had chosen a 12-year-old girl as its guardian, not because of her age or knowledge, but because she understood something fundamental about music and mathematics. They were languages of the heart as much as the mind. And in that understanding, she had found a bridge between two civilizations separated by time and space. It began with helicopters. Hanmei was practicing her morning musical routine with the ship when she heard them, their loud rotors shattering the peaceful countryside air. Soon, he rushed into the chamber, her face filled with worry. "They're everywhere," she said, catching her breath. "Military vehicles, government cars, news vans, they're coming up the road." She took Hanmei's hand. Someone must have leaked information about the ship. Through the chamber's entrance, they could see dozens of vehicles approaching the hillside. Men in suits and military uniforms poured out, setting up equipment and barriers. Dr. Kim arrived shortly after, his usually calm face tense with concern. "I tried to keep it quiet," he explained, watching the growing crowd outside. "But something this big, it was impossible to hide forever." He showed them his phone, displaying news headlines from around the world. Alien ship found in Korea. Ancient spacecraft discovery confirms extraterrestrial contact. Military mobilizes to secure alien technology. Hanmei felt her heart sink as she watched more officials arrive. She recognized the logos on their vehicles, not just Korean military, but American, Chinese, and Russian agencies too. The quiet hillside where she had spent so many peaceful summers was becoming a military zone. Two men in dark suits approached Soon-hee's house. They carried briefcases and wore polite but firm expressions. "We need to discuss the immediate transfer of this property," one of them said, pulling out official-looking documents. "It's a matter of national security." Soon-hee stood her ground, her small frame somehow filling the doorway. "This land has been in my family for generations," she said firmly. "We will not be pressured into selling it." But the pressure kept mounting. More officials arrived, each with their own demands and threats. They spoke of eminent domain, of security protocols, of international treaties. Some offered huge sums of money, while others made veiled threats about the consequences of non-cooperation. Dr. Kim tried to maintain order, arguing that the site should remain under scientific supervision. "This is a research discovery, not a military asset," he insisted, but his voice was drowned out by the growing chaos. Then came the moment that changed everything. A group of armed personnel, wearing badges from various agencies, decided to take matters into their own hands. They approached the ship's entrance, weapons ready, ignoring Dr. Kim's protests. Han Mai, who had been watching everything from inside the chamber, felt the ship's energy shift. As the armed group reached the entrance, a soft humming filled the air. Suddenly, a shimmering barrier materialized, like a curtain of light that covered the entire opening. The men tried to push through, but the barrier was solid as steel. They'd brought in equipment to scan it, to cut it, to disable it. Nothing worked. The barrier simply absorbed or deflected every attempt to breach it. Inside, Han Mei understood what had happened. The ship had activated its ancient defense systems, protecting itself and its guardian. She could feel it reaching out to her through their musical connection, showing her how to control the barrier. Taking up her gaijum, Han Mei began to play. The barrier responded to her music, becoming stronger or weaker, more or less transparent, following the rhythm of her songs. It was like conducting an orchestra of light and energy. Soon he watched with pride as her granddaughter took control of the situation. The officials outside were stunned. Their equipment showed energy readings off the charts, but they couldn't explain or overcome the barrier's power. The ship chose its guardian well, Dr. Kim said quietly, standing beside Sun Yi. They can bring all the weapons and technology they want, but they can't match the power of music and mathematics combined. Hours turned into days. The hillside became a standoff between military might and ancient technology. Journalists camped outside the barrier, broadcasting images of the shimmering dome to the world. Experts debated on television about what it meant, while governments argued over who had the right to control it. But inside the barrier, Han Mei continued her work with the ship. She knew now why the Ryun had created such powerful defenses, not out of fear or aggression, but to ensure their legacy would be discovered and used at the right time, by the right people. Each morning, she would play her gaijum, adjusting the barrier to allow in only those who came with peaceful intentions. Dr. Kim and his research team, her grandmother, and a few others who understood the true importance of the discovery. They can't force their way in, Han Mai explained to her grandmother one evening as they watched the sunset through the shimmering barrier. The ship won't let them. It was meant to be protected until humanity was ready to understand its message. The world outside might be in chaos, but within the barrier, the ancient music of the Ryun continued to play, guided by the hands of a 12-year-old girl who understood that some things were too important to be controlled by force or claimed by any single nation. The soft glow of the ship's interior reflected off Han Mei's face as she sat cross-legged in the main chamber, her gaijum resting in her lap. For weeks now, she had felt the ship trying to tell her something important, a deeper truth hidden beneath the surface of their musical conversations. That morning, as her fingers danced across the strings, playing a melody that had come to her in a dream, the ship's response changed. The usual patterns of light transformed into a new kind of hologram, more detailed and vivid than any before. She saw a beautiful world with 3 moons hanging in a purple sky. Crystal cities stretched across vast plains, their structures growing naturally from the ground like flowers made of light. This was the Ryun homeworld, but the images quickly turned dark. A massive object appeared in their sky, a rogue star, torn loose from its orbit, heading directly toward their solar system. The Ryun had seen it coming centuries in advance, giving them time to prepare, but not to save their world. Han Mai watched, her heart aching, as the Ryun made their final choice. They couldn't save their civilization, but they could preserve its essence. The ship revealed its deepest secret. Hidden within its walls was a vast library containing the complete genetic code of every Ryun life form, from the smallest organism to the Ryun themselves. "Oh," Han Mai whispered, understanding flooding through her. The ship wasn't just a research vessel or a time capsule. It was an ark, carrying the seeds of an entire civilization. Dr. Kim, who had been quietly observing nearby, saw the change in her expression. "What is it?" he asked gently. "What did you discover?" Han Mei's fingers trembled slightly as they rested on the gaijum strings. "They didn't just leave us their knowledge," she said. "They left us themselves. their whole species, preserved in a way that could bring them back. The holograms showed how the Rion had searched countless worlds, looking for a place to hide their precious cargo. They had chosen Earth not just for its suitable environment, but for its inhabitants. In early humans, they saw a spark of something familiar, the same blend of logic and creativity that had defined their own species. It was a test, Han Mai explained to Dr. Kim and her grandmother, who had joined them. The ship was designed to wait until humans discovered it naturally, until we were advanced enough to understand its message of harmony between music and mathematics. Soon he took her granddaughter's hand. And now that we found it, the ship's AI responded to her question with new images. It showed possibilities, futures where the Rion could be reborn, where their knowledge could help humanity reach the stars, where two civilizations could grow and learn together. But it also showed dangers, the chaos that might come if this knowledge was used too soon or fell into the wrong hands. The power to restore an ancient species was also the power to change the course of human development forever. Han Mi felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her young shoulders. Outside the barrier, nations still argued over who should control the ship. None of them knew its true purpose or the decision that now rested with a 12-year-old girl. "What do I do?" she asked softly, her fingers absently plucking at the gauge strings. The ship responded with gentle pulses of light, showing her images of the Rion's greatest achievements, not their technology or their cities, but their understanding of the harmony that connected all things. Dr. Kim watched the holograms with wonder. "They trusted us enough to leave this here," he said. "They believed that when the time came, humanity would make the right choice." Han Mai spent hours in meditation, playing her gayajum while the ship showed her more about the Rion civilization. She learned how they had achieved peace among their people, how they had balanced progress with preservation, how they had developed technology that worked in harmony with nature rather than against it. The genetic library was more than just a collection of DNA. It was a second chance, not just for the Rion, but for humanity to learn from an ancient civilization that had solved many of the problems Earth still faced. As night fell, Han Mai sat with her grandmother on their porch, looking up at the stars through the shimmering barrier. "They chose Earth as their sanctuary," she said quietly. "Now we have to decide if we're ready to be their guardians." Soon he smiled gently. "Perhaps that's why the ship chose you," she said. "Sometimes the wisest choices come from hearts that are still pure enough to see what really matters." Han Mai nodded, feeling the weight and the wonder of her responsibility. Tomorrow, she would have to make her decision, one that would affect not just one civilization, but two. For now, she sat in the peaceful night, listening to the ancient music of the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, the Rion were waiting to come home. As morning light filtered through the shimmering barrier, Han Mai stood before the gathered officials from around the world. Her gayajum rested in her hands, and her grandmother soon he stood proudly beside her. After days of deep thought and musical conversations with the ship, she had made her choice. "The Rion gave us a gift," she began, her voice clear and steady despite her age. "Not just their technology or their genetic library, but their trust. They believed we could learn to understand them, to grow into something greater than we are now." She explained her plan, developed with help from Dr. Kim and supported by her grandmother's wisdom. The Harmony Foundation would be established, not controlled by any single government, but overseen by an international council of scientists, artists, and teachers. The world leaders listened, some skeptical, others intrigued, as this 12-year-old girl outlined a vision for humanity's future. The ship's barrier remained active, giving weight to her words. Without cooperation, without accepting the true spirit of the Rion's gift, no one would access its secrets. "We're not ready yet," Han Mai explained, "to bring back the Rion. But we can learn from them, prepare ourselves, and when the time is right, we'll have earned the right to help them return." Dr. Kim stepped forward, presenting detailed plans for the foundation. The hillside would become a learning center, where people from around the world could study the Rion's harmony of music, mathematics, and science. The ship's defensive barrier would remain, controlled by Hanmi's music, ensuring that only those with peaceful intentions could enter. Months passed, and the Harmony Foundation took shape. The military vehicles were replaced by research buildings and music halls. Students and scientists came from every corner of the Earth, learning to communicate with the ship through music. Hanmi grew into her role as guardian, balancing her normal school life with her extraordinary responsibilities. She taught others the musical languages she had learned, showing them how to understand the ship's messages. Young children proved especially adept at grasping the connection between music and mathematics that the Rian had mastered. 5 years later, a teenage Hanmi stood in the main teaching hall, watching as a group of young students played their instruments together. The ship's walls pulsed with light, responding to their harmony. Some played traditional instruments from their home countries: gayajums, violins, flutes, and drums, creating a blend of Earth's musical heritage with the Rian's mathematical patterns. "They learned so quickly," Dr. Kim remarked, now showing touches of gray in his hair. "When we first found the ship, we thought it would take generations to understand its messages." Soon he, watching from her customary spot near the entrance, smiled knowingly. "Children see truth more clearly than we do," she said. "They don't have to unlearn their assumptions about what's possible." The Harmony Foundation had become more than just a research center. It was a bridge between past and future, between Earth and the stars. The genetic library remained safely preserved within the ship, protected by systems that only Hanmi could fully control. But its presence served as a reminder of the trust placed in humanity. As evening fell, Hanmi often sat in the ship's chamber, playing her gayajum and reflecting on how much had changed. The world outside had transformed too. Nations that once competed now collaborated, sharing discoveries and working together to prepare for the day when they would help restore the Rian civilization. "We'll be ready someday," she told the ship during one of their musical conversations. The walls sparkled with approval, showing her visions of a future where humans and Rian worked together, exploring the stars as one people. Looking out at the setting sun through the ever-present barrier, Hanmi understood completely why the Rian had chosen Earth and why the ship had chosen her. Sometimes the greatest wisdom comes not from age or knowledge, but from the ability to see with unclouded eyes and feel with an open heart. The music of two civilizations continued to play across the hillside, growing stronger with each passing day. And somewhere in the vast genetic library, the essence of the Rian waited patiently, knowing their trust had not been misplaced. When humanity was ready, they would return, not as ancient teachers or advanced beings, but as partners in the great dance of life among the stars. And it had all begun with a curious 12-year-old girl who dared to listen to the music of the stars and play back her own song in return.